Charles Hoskinson. Wherever you like. You can have this one. You like our chairs here? These are from the pawn shop next door.
Oh.
We're on a budget. You know where we are, right? We're at a nightclub in Colorado.
Oh, yeah. I spent my 20s in Denver. You know, I used to go to church.
Yeah. Well, it actually is a church. I had no idea the basement was so big there.
It's crazy, right?
Quite large, yeah. Well, you know, we're in Colorado. We're live streaming.
Oh, okay.
So,
hi, everybody.
Do you think we could get it like you're, you know,
do the thing?
Do the thing. I mean, we're here.
Well, this is Charles Hoskinson live from warm, sunny Colorado.
Yes.
Hey.
Woo!
Always warm and always sunny.
Yep.
Sometimes Colorado.
Sometimes Colorado. Well, that's awesome. I mean, having you here is great. And one of the things, I mean, I have a million questions to ask you, but of course, I'm going to keep it DAO focused.
Okay.
Maybe. But compared to me, I mean, you're a young guy. You're in your 30s.
Yeah, I'm 34.
Which I have a hard time understanding how someone your age, like, how are you so damn wise?
Is that a question?
Yeah. It's a softball question.
Oh, why are you so wise and handsome? I like this guy. This is a great place. I mean, I just talk to people. I read every day. You know, I always try to invest a lot of time into learning and into thinking. And, you know, I've always been interested in philosophy-based business. You see, I started in the Ron Paul movement back in 2007. And, you know, it was all Austrian economics and choose liberty and humble foreign policy. And the problem with loving monetary policy as a normal person is until cryptos came along, it was an armchair thing. You know, it's like opining on the nature of God. You're not really going to make a lot of progress on that. And so then suddenly cryptos came around and we could be our own bank. We could develop our own monetary policy for the first time in my life. And so I said, wow, this is a weird intersection of where technology, philosophy, and business is all coming together, and you're able to make meaningful strides on a global scale across the entire world. So I said, boy, this is once lifetime. I'm never in my life going to have another opportunity like this. And so just go all in every day, you know, with anger and focus, and just push and get it done.
Makes sense. I mean, it may be that once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, do you believe that blockchain really has the potential to right the wrongs of monetary policy up until this point?
Well, I mean, look at El Salvador as a great example. A nation state has adopted Bitcoin. If I told you that back in 2010, you'd be like, what drugs is this guy on? I want some of those. I mean, it's nuts that magic internet money is more appealing to people than the world financial order, but it's also a response to loss of legitimacy of institutions in general. Every year, more and more institutions become morally bankrupt, and we start asking ourselves, why are they even here? Why bother? And people become more cynical and disenfranchised and distrustful, and we've become very tribal and polarized as a society. And what we sell ultimately as an industry is this idea of bringing people together, collaborating together. You know, blockchain is a universal construct, and it's an engine for managing trust and audit and oversight and inclusive accountability and all these other properties that we would like to have in our money, in our voting system, and our supply chain systems. And once you drink that Kool-Aid, once you go down that road, you start realizing how bankrupt most of the world really is. So you have no other choice but to keep down this journey, because the alternative is to, you know, live in hell.
Right.
And I don't want that. I don't think anybody wants that.
Yeah, nobody wants. Well, some people want to live in hell, but most of us don't.
The people who financially benefit.
Right. Yeah. Well, so you know, you've been on the record as saying that if something is wrong, and I'm paraphrasing here, but if something seems so wrong with the system and it's not being righted, then somebody's making money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the ultimate test. If you don't understand why something's screwed up, and it just keeps going on and no one fixes it, then the answer is someone's making money from it being screwed up. And you can look at any system from tuition to healthcare costs to, war, all these things. You're like, well, these are smart people. Why would they behave in such a crazy way? And why don't they work together to fix it? Well, because at the end of the rainbow, somebody's getting rich off of it. It's just that simple.
Yeah. Well, speaking of monetary policy, I mean, you've also been fairly critical, may have had a reaction or two to people talking about burning tokens. But as, DAOs, I mean, we create communities and we have to regulate the monetary policy on a community, based level. Is there any time that it does make sense to have a burn or a mint or, to somehow manipulate, let's say, the currency? Or
yeah, if you have algorithms that require that, like an algorithmic stable coin, or you're doing a token upgrade, so proof of burn to destroy a token, to redeem a token on another system, that makes a lot of sense. Where it becomes problematic is when you have a cryptocurrency with a deflationary monetary policy like Bitcoin or Cardano, and there's a fixed monetary policy, to come in and say, well, destroy tokens. Well, why are they asking you to do that? They're asking to do that to manipulate the price. And the tokens are already all distributed, so you literally have to steal tokens from somebody to do that. The problem is there's a lot of projects where there's this gigantic pre-mine that insiders control, like a foundation or something like that. And they've kind of indoctrinated an entire generation of investors in this industry to believe that every cryptocurrency is that way. It's not the case with Cardano, and it's not the case with Bitcoin. So there's certainly things like Ethereum did this with the IP, was it 1559?
1155?
1155, that's right.
Yeah.
One of the EIPs. Yeah. They have a burning policy now. And, it could work. But then you have to be really careful behind, well, if that's an algorithm, you can game algorithms in very unproductive ways. And so you have to be always thinking, like, how do I build the ultimate algorithm that's not manipulatable? And then if it's humans deciding this, how are we any better than the Federal Reserve manipulating interest rates and monetary supply? I mean, I thought we built these things to get away from that, and now we're going back to that because some day trader wants to get a 10x.
Right.
And the greatest burn in the industry, I think, was Stellar. Didn't they destroy like a meaningful percentage of the entire supply? And it did nothing for them in terms of price appreciation. So in practice, it doesn't actually work. But we wrote a paper on it. We read a lot of papers. So if you're interested, there's a proof of burn paper that shows how to do a provably secure proof of burn, and it's something anybody can implement for the monetary policy of their DApp if they want to pursue that end and do it in a provably secure way.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, do you also see that with Cardano that there's going to be that opportunity for folks to, establish, I guess Cardano right now, just like the rest of the crypto market, is somewhat tethered to Bitcoin.
Right.
And do you see that, that flippening or that change?
The great decoupling. If I was equally crazy to the Bitcoin enthusiasts, I'll say, well, yeah, sure, of course, when Cardano passes Bitcoin and we're the largest cryptocurrency in the world, then everybody will be coupled to us, right? The reality is that we all have to grow up a bit. And the reason why the coupling occurs is because the trading pairs and a litany of market dynamics. But at some point, it will break because it makes no sense that if the CEO of Google dies or some scandal happens at Google, that Microsoft stock should also go down. So analogously, if some problem happens with Bitcoin, it makes no sense that Ethereum and Cardano and completely unrelated things should also fall down or go up for no particular reason. And that's just an indication of where the markets are at and the maturity of the ecosystem. But over time, my belief is that decoupling will occur when you have more use and utility in the underlying systems. So if there are billions of dollars of loans and NFT transactions and all these other things, and they're creating a natural, multi-party circular economy, then there's a natural appreciation that occurs, or just market dynamics that occur that are disconnected from trading of Bitcoin or these types of things. And we see that in natural resources. I mean, there's certainly correlations between coal and natural gas and oil and other materials, and hedge funds do take advantage of that, but they're significantly weaker than the correlations that we see with Bitcoin and the remainder of the altcoins. And that's just because of the depth of the markets and the maturity and the financial products that exist within the marketplaces.
So one day, perhaps, in the next, let's say, 10 years, once there is a flippening and the decoupling, and once people realize that, monetary, or let's say manipulated monetary policy is not the best way to regulate, and we can have true supply and demand economics, perhaps at that time people will appreciate or start to decouple price and value. I think people have a very mixed up relationship or understanding of price and value these days.
Yeah, it's hard to measure, and also the market tends to undervalue things. I thought for sure at this point in the market, people would start paying a lot more attention to correctness and security and decentralization. No, the market signals are actually not there. So it just is depressing as hell when you see things that are hyper centralized and they work until you have to kick them to restart them, and they have all this great success in the marketplace and no one seems to care. And that's just where it's at. And part of that is consumer education. Part of that is just rampant speculation. And, these are ephemeral events. People over time learn more about the technology and they start valuing certain things. And also you live crisis by crisis. A lot of people forget what put Bitcoin on the map was the Cypriot crisis. We were at $4 Bitcoin. We went to $250 Bitcoin in 2013. It was because in Cyprus, the government started taking money out of people's bank accounts. And some people are like, well, they can't do this with Bitcoin, right? Now there's an entire nation state, Canada. It's basically declared martial law, and it's going around stealing money from people. And they're trying to find a way to seize crypto from people. Yeah, best of luck with that.
Yeah, good luck.
And so now the entire nation of Canada is having that conversation of, hey, maybe we should have money that the government can't take, because they seem to be all more than willing to do that. You see, so events occur, and these events start training people the nature of power and centralization, and they start teaching people that maybe they should be more in control of their voice, their freedom of expression, their right to commercial activity, and right to association. It's the same with deplatforming. We live in an age where if you speak the truth, you could be arbitrarily thrown away and completely cut out of a social network. And canceled effectively. So the minute that happens to somebody, especially someone you know, love, and like, then you start asking, well, I need an alternative. The minute they went after Joe Rogan, there was more conversation that week about decentralized social networks than probably the last 5 years, in that 1 week. So we're educating an entire community the power of decentralization. So I think the undervaluing of decentralization and the undervaluing of correctness and security, they're going to resolve over time. And these are just market anomalies, and they come in the boom bust cycle. I've been through 5 of them. I watched Bitcoin go from under $1 to 30 to down to 4, up to 250, then to 80, then to 1,200, then to 250, then to 20,000, woo, and then down to 4,000, then 4,000 to 64,000. Now we're at 40. I've watched it, and all along the way, there was all kinds of madness, and you'd see it in the conferences. So when we were in a boom year, they were crazy, especially Mo Levin's conferences, man.
Big parties.
Yeah. But then we were in a bust year. There was like, hey, want to buy a pizza?
Yeah.
How you doing? Yeah, the hype comes and goes, and you have a lot of fair weather people, but the core has remained the same. There's still a lot of familiar faces, and the technology is legitimately getting better. We're having deeper conversations about holistic measurements of energy consumption, of decentralization, certification of smart contracts. There are great companies like Certic and Runtime Verification that do that, and thousands of academic papers and millions of lines of code. So it's a very different space today than it was even 3 years ago.
Yeah, so it's sad that it sometimes takes tragedy or a calamity of some sort in order for people to realize, oh, this is a better system. What's even sadder, though, is that sometimes in this day and age, a global calamity like a pandemic can make things go the other way. I mean, it seemed like during COVID, certainly blockchain has been proliferating, but at the same time, many other things have been centralized,
right? Like
healthcare, right? I mean, how does that make sense?
Well, during a crisis, there tends to be an appeal to authority, and there tends to be a strengthening of emergency institutions, which by design must be centralized because they need to move quickly for an event. Decentralization, the hard part of that is you don't move as fast. you bring more people along and you can preserve principles and checks and balances, and by their design they have to be more transparent. But if a crisis occurs, like a hurricane or a pandemic or something like that, you may not be moving fast enough to save life or prevent death or loss of massive amounts of money. So there's this interplay between emergency crisis powers and the need for checks and balances. But let's be very clear, no emergency lasts 2 years. That's a war.
Yeah.
Okay, and anybody who tries to convince you otherwise is making money from that or gaining power from that. And making people do arbitrary things is not public health, it's compliance. And this is the society that we're in right now. So if we want to get out of it, we need to make sure that we have high integrity institutions, like, for example, the voting is unimpeachable. And then we need to remind the people who are in charge that we're in charge and vote our way out of it. And then also take back certain powers, like the printing press. I will remind everybody we were at $30 trillion of debt. When I went to college, started at Metro State, we were at $4 trillion. We're at 30 now. That wasn't too long ago. As you mentioned, I'm a young guy.
Yeah, you're a young guy.
Okay. $30 trillion is so much money. This is literally enough money to rebuild every single road, train, airport in America 30 times. Just to give you a sense of the scale of that amount of money. This is enough money to have everybody in this country go to college for free for more than a century and give all of you free health care. Okay, and allow anyone who makes less than $25,000 a year to retire at that level for a century. This is not a small amount of value we're talking about, and we don't pay real interest on that. What if we pay 10% on that? That's more than all the tax revenue of the United States. What prevents that from occurring? Well, the petrodollar. See, so we're starting to have very inconvenient truths be revealed by the current monetary policy, and there's no sustainability in any of this. And we have political parties that seem to live in a fantasy world. Like if they just put their head in the sand, that we're all just going to relent.
Yeah. Or just immediately take the opposite position of whatever the first guy took.
I'll give just a quick example. So I got a ranch up in Wyoming, and so I bought some propane tanks for that ranch, big tanks because we lose power all the time, and I needed to make sure that we had some backup. So I bought them for $25,000 a tank, and I hadn't buried them yet because there was big supply chain delays in getting the labor for it. So 5 months later, the company I bought them from calls me up and they say, "You still got those tanks?" I say, "Yeah, I haven't buried them yet." They say, "Can we buy some of them back?" I say, out of curiosity, how much? They say $35,000 a tank. In 5 months, the company I bought it from, the price went from $25,000 to $35,000. And they have the balls to tell us that there's only 7% inflation.
Right.
There's no inflation as long as you don't count the price of beef, chicken, and pork, right? It's just like 1984, the dialogue that's coming out. But this is a great opportunity for all of us.
You're referring to the book, not the year.
Yeah. This is a great opportunity for all of us in this room, because if we want to do better, we have to be better, so we have to build better. So all the builders, the engineers, the entrepreneurs, we have to really start thinking about, well, what are the social dynamics we admire and respect? How should we treat each other? How do you verify claims that people make? What does the institution of the future need to look like that's always online, global first, transnational, and has integrity at its core? Hopefully algorithmic integrity, which is the whole point of DAOs. This is the whole point of what our industry has been pursuing at its highest level. And if you look at a blockchain's ledger rules, whether it be Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano, it's kind of like a digital constitution. It guarantees certain things. I know Bitcoin's monetary policy is not going to change. If there was ever a time for it, it would happen with the Mt. Gox crisis. That was their 2008. And it didn't happen. The core developers lost personally millions of dollars. And so as a result, it can never change. No one can change it. So that's a right. It's almost like a law of physics, like gravity. So then you start asking yourself, well, what if we could have that same level of assurance in our voting system or in our healthcare system or in our education system? And this is functionally the conversation that we're having at a scale of the entire world at the same time, as there's an appetite now to replace the institutions that are no longer working for us.
Yeah, so where can this happen? I mean, among this pandemic, you took the opportunity to visit 6 different countries?
I've been to 70 countries in the last 5 years, but we went to 6 countries in Africa last year in September. We went to South Africa, Zanzibar, Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Egypt. And we met with the president of Burundi. We met with the president of Zanzibar, a lot of government officials in South Africa and Ethiopia. And there's an enormous appetite in the developing world for new systems because they need liquidity, they need legitimacy, they need a restoration of trust, and ultimately they have to manage collectively in Africa over 1 billion people. That's hard. And so you start saying, well, okay, if we're going to do this, how do we avoid the mistakes of Europe and China and the United States? And also, how do we build economies that are intrinsically fair? What people forget about Africa in particular is it's the youngest continent. 70% of the population of Ethiopia is at or under the age of 30. And a lot of them are digital natives. They grew up with cell phones. They grew up with the internet. So they see what's going around the entire world, and they say, we can do better. And they're starting to replace a lot of the old leaders with young leaders who are in their 40s and 50s who are also digital natives. President of Ethiopia, for example, is a cryptographer. It's the only one in the world. Think about that. Yeah. And so that's a unique thing. So it's a great opportunity to open a conversation of, well, what can we improve? In some cases, you're very conservative. For example, Ethiopia, there we have an identity system we're deploying for academic credentials. The Civil War actually proved the need of the system. We're onboarding millions of students, K through 12, and the ones that haven't been onboarded yet, they've lost their credentials in many cases because of the Civil War. So you have this beautiful A/B test, and the government came to us and said, "Can we accelerate this to 20 million people? You know, how do we actually figure this out?" So we're working on it. You know, we're at capacity. In other cases like Burundi, there's an appetite there to move very quickly because they have huge infrastructural problems. Only 3% of the population is online. 11% has electricity. 9 out of 10 people don't have reliable electricity in 2022. But that's an opportunity. We talk about carbon neutral. We talk about alternative grids. And we believe, well, America must do this. Well, if you're building a completely new power grid, why don't you just build that in a decentralized way with co-ops in a completely alternative energy friendly way? Let's work the economics out to make that happen. If you're building a new telecommunication system, instead of having 4 companies decide everything online, the on and off ramps, why don't we build local ISPs and co-ops? That's exactly what we're working with World Mobile on with Zanzibar. They're going to cover 2.2 million people, the entire island and 50 miles out. So all the fishing that's happening in the blue economy. And the hope is to build a decentralized infrastructure where the on and off ramps are community owned as opposed to being owned by a big company that's somewhere. You see, so these are great opportunities and challenges, and whatever the challenge is, if you rise to the occasion, you can change things. And if you change it in just the right way, you change the world. And everybody in this room has equal access to that.
Well, that was a great segue to my next question, which is, what can DAO governors do? People who run DAOs, people who build DAOs. I mean, the DAO concept, anyone feel free to disagree with me, but it seems like it's a couple of steps down the rabbit hole, right? Like you trip over I heard something about crypto. And then it's like, oh, there's smart contracts, okay. And then you're like, oh, wait, you can run an organization this way. It's several layers down. How do we accelerate that adoption?
So the problem with DAO is that each letter is nebulous. We don't have a good definition of decentralization, although we as an industry are trying to work on one. We don't have a good definition of autonomous, automation, these types of things, like artificial general intelligence. Like what do we actually mean by that? Nick Szabo wrote a great paper on dry code versus wet code, and at an organization, like, what the fuck is that? What does that mean? So each one of those letters is nebulous. And what I found in the DAO space is that usually a lot of people who utter that word are doing so to evade liability. So they take something that's heavily regulated if you are in a centralized organization. That would certainly be a security or require a license like an exchange. And they say, well, we're decentralized, we're DAO, so obviously regulation doesn't apply to us. And so the regulators are like, nah. And so there's now going to be a big fight that occurs. And actually what's advantageous about that fight is it's going to force definitions. of sufficiently decentralized.
And it's going to force them to learn about it too, right?
Exactly. Now, the good news is there's great research that's being done in each letter. And there's great research in particularly in the O, in organizational design. And there's even legislative accomplishments. So the last 5 years, 26 laws have been passed in the state of Wyoming. The one relevant to this event is the DAO law in Wyoming. So there's actually a
DAO
legal...
LLC.
Yeah, DAO LLC. Now, there are some problems that need to be addressed and resolved in practice with the implementation of that, but that's a great example of where a regulator is actually willing to work with the community and try to figure out a way forward. There's a lot of open questions about checks and balances, level of transparency, what is kept secret, what's not, the rights of the individual. Cardano actually has one of the largest decentralized organizations in the world, Catalyst. We just closed Fund Round 7, 257,000 votes, over 100,000 people actively participating. It's funded this round 269 organizations, and every ADA holder gets the vote. So that's growing and growing, and we're adding another layer with liquid democracy now. So we have this idea of delegates. People delegate their vote to another person, and that person can vote on your behalf. So like a whole governance class is forming of thousands and eventually tens of thousands of people, and every asset issued on Cardano will eventually be able to utilize those governance tools. But then there's a question of what is good governance. So you have questions about ballot design, frequency of consent, voting systems. Is it linear preference sorting or a threshold or quadratic? There are millions of design parameters here, and I would argue that every problem requires a slightly different parameterization of these things. There's a world of difference between a system that has control over your life and rights versus a system that has control over your retirement fund, versus a system that curates like an HOA, a community, and make sure that the driveways get scraped for snow and people are doing landscaping and so forth. So each of these things requires consent. Each of these things has some form of a democratic process. Each of these things are around a concept of assets and geography, but they have different the thresholds and stakes and so forth. So that's what we're trying to figure out as an industry. And the good news is this is one of the most fertile, creative areas as an industry. There's literally billions of dollars that have been poured into this. There are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are participating in this. A lot of failures, as expected, but actually some great successes that are occurring. And I'm very hopeful that this is, in particular, over the next 8 years, as we leave the 2020s and enter the 2030s, going to be one of the pillars of success of the cryptocurrency space as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of failures and success, I mean, you've had both, but I think people don't necessarily realize the amount of effort being put into Cardano. I mean, in terms of, as a coder, looking at GitHub commits, I mean, it's kind of like not even a comparison. I mean, big community.
Yeah, 3 million people, over 1 million lines of code. We're number one every year for GitHub commits. There's this bizarre thing I've noticed, maybe because we didn't ever take any VC money and the VCs own the media, but there's this bizarre thing I've noticed in industry where every time we do something or accomplish something, people move the goalposts. Like a Masari index showed that we were number one for transaction volume.
Like you'll never launch smart contracts
but we
September.
Did. Yeah, like, and even put money on the line for it. It doesn't matter. They just move the goalpost. We were number one for transaction volume. We even beat Bitcoin. And they're like, well, that's just because of the extended UTXO model. It's like, Bitcoin has UTXO too. It's apples to apples. Come on, man. Well, it doesn't matter. 300 plus projects on Cardano, lots of cool things going on. But, it's neither here nor there. There's an old saying, the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. I don't fucking care.
Right. You don't watch data price.
Every day we grow, and every day we get closer to our mission. 8 years ago, I was in Bermuda, and I did a TED Talk, and I said, this is what crypto is all about, economic identity and systems and enfranchising the people who are currently left out of the world and making their lives better. Now I can go back to Bermuda come October and actually talk about loans being done, talk about progress on the ground with real people in Kenya and Ethiopia and other places. That's amazing that in 8 years we've gone from an idea to a 3 million person movement that has percolated across the entire world with adherents everywhere. 130 research papers written. That velocity is not going to slow down. The institutions aren't going to just wake up and be like, hey, you know, we're getting like professorships and academic kudos from working on this technology, but let's just stop and go somewhere else. No, they're going to keep writing papers. So that's going to speed up. You're getting more people. The same for the coding. It's becoming a polyglot. Like, many people aren't aware that before the end of the year, you can deploy Solidity code on Cardano. So if you're an Ethereum developer, you also can be a Cardano developer. We're just better, faster, and cheaper forever. Okay, so there's a lot of cool stuff that's in that ecosystem that people will discover. And whether they discover it today or a year from now or 5 years from now, no one's leaving.
Yeah.
They're inspired. They're passionate.
I was going to ask about Aili, but you just promised us the end of the year for Ethereum smart contracts running on
the
Cardano.
testnet is coming out in March for Mamba. You know, all that time we spent with Ethereum Classic, we actually built a full Ethereum node in Scala. We learned how to build Ethereum as well as Consensus or anybody else. It was tough because there were a lot of stuff we wanted to change because the protocol's so shitty, but we did it, and in every category we try to innovate a little bit. And what you've noticed with all these EVM compatible chains, what they usually do is they run a BFT protocol under the hood. We saw that coming more than 4 years ago. So one of the things we did with Ouroboros is we said, look, this is a really different form of proof of stake. You don't have to bond and lock your tokens. You don't have to do any of this garbage and lose liquidity.
Chooses validators just so that...
Yeah, Ouroboros is the proof of stake protocol Cardano. But the point is that stake pool structure maps very well for like an Algorand style sortition. So you can bootstrap permission chains from that permissionless structure and run them at a high velocity with the same trust model of the underlying infrastructure. Well, if you can do that, you can replicate what Binance Smart Chain and all these other guys have effectively done. Because under the hood, a lot of cases they're running permission systems or pseudo permission systems with some curation. But they're no longer permission. They're permissionless because the Ouroboros is under the hood. And so anytime a BFT protocol gets faster, we get it for free. Yeah. And we get all that finality and fast settlement and so forth. So it's a good model. And, there's 6 years of research that went into it. And, you Google any of our papers that are foundational, they have over 1,000 citations. They were peer reviewed. Yeah. And people don't seem to understand how hard that is. These conferences, they only accept about 10% of the papers there, and you go to get yelled at by people who have PhDs and are really smart. Like, I went to a conference, Eurocrypt, Eddie Shamir was there. That's the S in RSA. He has the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. I was on a panel with the guy, and he's like, I don't like proof of stake. He's like, oh, fuck. Like, how do we argue with this guy? He's got like 4 PhDs worth of computer science knowledge. Right? It's like, what do? But you go and you take the abuse because it makes you better and it gives you independent validation that you're headed along the right track and the right road. And we're now seeing the fruits of those labors. What we sow, we see the extended UTXO models, massively parallelizable. Plutus is really easy to verify, so you can write high assurance smart contracts. And in an industry where $10.5 billion worth of shit was stolen last year, probably a good idea that we start focusing on security and correctness and verification. Probably a good idea that our languages help us in that particular direction. Yeah. If you disagree with me, fine. Keep doing Ethereum, but just do it here because it's 1,000 times cheaper and faster.
Well, maybe it's because maybe it's because you don't have the first mover or second mover advantage in this case. I mean, when smart contracts launched in September, I think everyone had this expectation that the next day, like September 13th, we're going to be like all these dApps.
Yeah, but Igor, our ghost chain is at capacity. It's Casper the constipated ghost. I mean, we're at 80%, 90% blocks right now, and we have 300 projects that are building and deploying, and there's just enormous amounts of activity. TVL is up over 2,000-3,000% in the last 2 months. Right. It'll turn on. Pipelining will come in June, input endorsers in October, and we'll get those orders of magnitude kicks up of performance. Sure. So I don't worry about it. It's like people, again, keep moving the goalposts. Yeah. They say no one will ever build. You have no developers. You've trained 10,000 people with the Plutus Pioneers program. Go to our developer Discord and see how many people are there.
It's true, but I'm going to push back a little bit because, people coming from Solidity had a hard time with the EUTXO model.
Sure.
So it's like if
and people writing single core applications had a hard time when multi-core came. So should Intel just not do multi-core processors? You can't ask that you want a beautiful level 2 model and on-chain, off-chain transactions and high levels of parallelization, local verification and deterministic gas prices, but then at the same time say make it as easy as the accounts model. You can build abstractions and layers that handle some of these mechanics for you, and that's what we did in the history of programming languages. C and C++, you do memory management manually. Java, you don't. You have garbage collection, and it does that for you, but that abstraction costs you something. Okay, so we're in the C, C++ days of the ecosystem. We're not in the Java days of the ecosystem quite yet. And over time, 6 months, a year, those abstractions will be built and developers can pick and choose. If you disagree with that, then go to an accounts-based model, which Cardano also supports.
So you see layer 2 as like, this needs to be part of the system. Did you always see it that way? I mean, it's, you know, if I wanted to airdrop everyone some native Cardano tokens, my tokens, I would have to pay 1 ADA per person in order to send that out. But I could do the same on Polygon, and it'll cost pennies.
Yeah, batching is a very important thing. By the way, UTXO allows you to do batching. Ergo demonstrated this recently. They did 5,000 transactions in one transaction. They had 5,000 outputs.
Roll-up.
No, it's just the inputs, outputs.
Oh.
Yeah, you don't even need exotic crypto for this type of stuff because the input-output model, they allow you to do that with UTXO. You can say all these inputs and all these outputs are rolled and batched together into one transaction that we post. It's very efficient. Accounts-based is sequential by design. So it's never easy to parallelize that. You have to do a lot of bizarre tricks to get it there. And then in many cases, you lose determinism. So it's like the difference between local variables and global variables. You know, side effects happen, things happen, and then you lose predictability, and then suddenly a bug occurs, and then people exploit it and steal all your money.
Yeah.
So your base layer should be built in a way that it's bedrock, and if you want high efficiency, you build structures for that. That's why we created Hydra. And over a long period of time, few years, Hydra will mature and grow and evolve to absorb everything. It'll have roll-ups in the head and all kinds of cool batching and great support for microtransactions. And it's isomorphic to the base layer, so value in transactions can move back and forth seamlessly because we co-design them together. So whenever that's ready, it's ready. It's just a component of what we do alongside side chains, alongside Mithril, alongside pipelining and input endorsers and so forth. And again, if you don't like that model, you're more familiar with the accounts model, then just use the EVM sidechain. You see, so it's the best of both worlds. We wrote the white paper for Cardano back in 2016, Why Cardano? And we had this idea of a settlement layer and a computation layer. And we said, we'll have one settlement layer and lots of computation layers, and the computation layers can have different philosophies of computation. So some can be like, we want to have lots of programming languages. And others can be like, we want to support legacy systems like the EVM because that's the market standard. And others can be, well, we want to do domain-specific logic for high-volume applications. Maybe a Fortune 500 company comes in and they want to do something on the project. Well, they alone with their customer base generate billions of transactions a month. Maybe there's special accommodations for them because there's so much volume that's going there. But you can permit all of those to live in the same house and with the same security model. But the underlying settlement layer, it gives you very strong guarantees that this whole orchestra is going to play correctly. Then 2 years later, F2 started getting announced, and they're like, hey, look, we have Oracle chain and all these side chains.
6 months.
Oh, okay. So it sounds very familiar to something else. But okay, so a lot of people are moving in that particular direction, whether it be Polkadot with parachains or these other things, and it just makes sense to do it. And you can't make everybody happy. If you're a Java programmer, you might be happy there, but then a Python developer is not.
Right.
So they have to have their tools and their languages and so forth. And same with political diversity. In this room, there's probably a Republican, there's probably a Democrat, there's probably a communist, there's probably an anarchist, there's probably a libertarian, there's probably a democratic socialist. They're all in the same room, okay? Yeah. And so all the power to them. I'm a libertarian-like guy, so I love everybody. Right. So I wanted to build a blockchain that had all those capabilities under the hood, and the community could decide which ones to invest in and build up, and then over time it can grow there. But one thing we didn't skimp on was security. We thought very carefully about the underlying infrastructure, and we started from bedrock. The GKL 15 paper, which is our most cited paper, came out in 2015. It didn't talk about Cardano and Ethereum, and it just talked about blockchain in general and said, what security properties must all blockchains have, and how do you prove your consensus algorithm, whether it be proof of work or anything else, provides those guarantees. Then you have a proof target for a security model. And layer by layer, paper by paper, design by design, design by design, we built all those abstractions, all those things to get to where we're at today. But that's the foundation. It's bedrock, and it's one of the most cited papers in the entire industry. So that's where we started, and then now we're getting to the point of diversity. And a lot of people have different opinions. DC Spark is one of the companies in our ecosystem. It's led by Nico and Sebastian, and they're great people. They believe the future for scaling Cardano is probably going to be a roll-ups-based solution. We're pursuing a state channel-based solution, a payment channel-based solution with Hydra alongside layer 1 improvements. These work in parallel. They're not either or. They're not contingent on each other. So they're doing their thing. We do our thing. $150,000 of funding just came in from Fund 7 specifically for roll-ups. And there's good people thinking about these things. Now, other people are saying, well, maybe off-chain computation using an MMM signature like what the guys at ETH Zurich are doing with ACE, maybe that makes sense. So there's a venture called EigenLayer out of University of Washington that's exploring a similar approach to this. And they're looking at that. Again, that's in parallel. Because when you have a 3 million person ecosystem with all this money floating around, you can take many bets, 1,000 flowers, and some may wilt, some may bloom.
Right.
You know,
right.
That's where we should be.
I think we could probably talk tech all day, but we might lose half the audience or all of the audience. I want to ask you about the tribalism that's kind of developed over your years in the ecosystem. I mean, it seems like, you know, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. We got a lot of flack for inviting you from some people. You know, we're sellouts to some degree.
Wow.
We are having. I mean, you know, we're having Charles Hoskinson speak at the DAODenver conference. I don't know. You know, it's silly to me. We were you know, kind of put under fire for charging for this, as if, you know, the space is free and the food is free, and, you know, people have this sort of mixed up view of value. But it seems like it's just tribalism. Is there room for this in blockchain? I mean, I thought we were here with better values.
You know, tribalism is analogous to hate. You know, a good definition of hate is taking poison and hoping the other guy dies. You're tribal. What are you accomplishing? You know, if you walk into a bar and you see a bunch of people fighting and yelling at each other, you walk out. You don't like, oh, this is the bar for me. This is unless you're a crazy person. Okay, so similarly, if you have an ecosystem and you're a new person, genuine new person, they walk in and we talk, and then suddenly everybody's fighting and they attack you and so forth. That's just a terrible thing. Imagine, pick your favorite celebrity, politician, business leader who has yet to say something significant about crypto. And they walk in and they show up at an event, a Bitcoin event, an Ethereum event, Cardano event, whatever it is. Healthy ecosystems should celebrate that universally and get excited that this new person's there. Unhealthy ecosystems say, well, you showed up at an Ethereum event. You're a bad human being. You know, I went to the Bitcoin event last year when Bitcoin was the all-time high of $64,000. I had a fucking toilet paper roll thrown at me. You know, and they say, here's your shitcoin. And they threw this roll at me. And I'm just like, really? And you have Max Kaiser running around baptizing people and, you know, saying, fuck Elon, we're not selling. And so, and that really is what we want to show the world? This is really how we want to present. When we go talk to heads of state and say, Mr. President, let's talk about crypto. Don't want to talk about crypto. You know, because why? Because they know the minute they embrace crypto, they're going to get brutalized from every different angle and so forth. And it hurts us in every dimension.
Right.
I remember the first significant cryptography conference I went to. I was at Crypto in Santa Barbara, and I was excited because we just finished the Ouroboros paper, and we were presenting it there. And this is like the top shelf cryptography conference. Oh, the who's who is there. So I saw Diffie, you know, Willock Diffie from Diffie Hellman. He's like a Turing Award guy and everything. He's got his cowboy boots on and his hair and everything. I was like, oh my God, I'm fanboying out. I'm all excited. So I got my wine. He has his wine, and I walk up to him. We start talking for a little bit, and he says, so, you know, where do you teach? What do you do? And I said, oh, no, I'm actually not a professor. I'm a cryptocurrency guy. He didn't say anything. He just picked his wine and walked away. Seriously, I was just like, wow. Okay, so
good talking to you too.
What? Because cryptographers, they spent 40 years being academic professionals, and writing papers and getting PhDs and doing all this amazing work. And then cryptocurrencies come around, and cryptocurrencies like just absorb the word crypto. If, in 1999, you say, I'm in crypto. Oh, you're a cryptographer. You're an information security guy. You design protocols, these types of things. Now you say you're in crypto, it's like you're an NFT enthusiast.
Right.
Right? And so they're like, you've destroyed our field. Yeah. And then whenever they speak about something, they get brutalized on Twitter. I mean, you're used to being criticized on the merits of your work, and then you go to Twitter and say, I'm not so sure about this thing. And then suddenly like 5,000 people out of damn nowhere who are fanboys of a particular tribe attack you, try to get you fired, say you're an idiot, say you have a financial conflict. Look at Moxie Marlin spoke. Yeah. Guy created the Signal protocol. How many people here use Signal? Yeah, a few people. It's one of the most secure protocols around, and it does lots of cool things. He's a real information security guy. He's not a crypto guy, And so he says, I'm going to look into this Web3 thing because everybody emails him every day. What do you think of Web3? What do you think of Web3? What do you think of Ethereum? So he writes a blog post and he says, you're building everything that you claim is Web3 in Web2, but worse. And here's why. And let me demonstrate it with NFTs and how bad these protocols are in their design. They don't even do integrity checks on the images that are in the NFTs. The response to that should be
like Twitter.
Yeah. The response to this should be like, God, man, we need to do better as an industry. We really need to clean up our act. Instead it's like, he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. Right. So Moxie's going to leave, right?
Yeah.
And we lose that guy, all that brilliance, all that capability. Imagine having a conversation about private communication. Who better to invite to the party? Because he thought for over 15 years, how do I do this to an extent that the Department of Homeland Security has him on a watch list. I mean, he's pretty good if the government's watching you, okay? And so now that guy is just being pissed on by the tribes.
Yeah.
It's so crazy to me. It really is. And you speak of tribalism over there in DAODenver, half the people there hate me.
Yeah.
They've never met me. They've never interacted with me. They hate me. Like if they ask, who's Charles Hoskinson? They'll quote a MetaMask tweet or all these other things.
Well, I mean,
it's so crazy.
Yeah, and I've heard Vitalik speak, and I don't think Vitalik hates you. And but anyway, we don't have to go there. Let's wrap things up by talking about DAOs.
Ooh.
How do we, as DAO governors, embrace Cardano as a platform?
So the cool part about Cardano is that we've kind of centralized a lot of thought, conversation, and work for DAO in abstraction around the Catalyst project. So you have this fertile territory of more than 100,000 people who are every day thinking, what is consent? What rights do I have? What voting system should we have? Plus, you have all these great researchers that are inside there that design e-voting protocols and these types of things. So you have one level of engagement where you have a great community just to have a conversation with. Then the other level of engagement is that community is in many cases willing to fund people to do research. Like they put $150,000 as a grant into ZK roll-up research. I can imagine them doing exactly the same for generic DAO research or these types of things. And because Cardano is multi-paradigm, if you're an Ethereum person, you want to stay in that ecosystem, well, you can beta test stuff on the Cardano blockchain, these types of things. So that's one dimension of it. The other dimension is we have access to a lot of amazing academics who are interdisciplinary. So we have social choice theory, game theory people, mechanism design people, distributed systems people, programming language people, cryptographers, law and policy experts, all of these things across, I think, 15, 16 universities in the world, all across the sun never sets on IO's research arm. So if you are a researcher and you have some really cool and interesting ideas, just email us. Just talk to us. We fund research all the time. We collaborate with people all the time. We've written 130 papers, and that's where we're at. And we need good definitions. We need really good definitions of decentralization. We need good definitions of automation. I talk about the A lot with Ben Gortzel from SingularityNet. He got his PhD in math at 21. He's written 300 papers, and he's an AI expert. Batshit crazy.
Yeah.
But I love him.
Most of them are.
He's like family, and we talk all the time. And, and he comes up with these crazy ideas. And we're like, we should put some money into them. We should do some stuff with them. And we talk a lot about how much automation is possible. What should you automate? What should you not? There's also a big conversation of privacy. When we wrote the original DAO paper, Larimer did it in Floyd, Virginia. I helped him edit the paper, and we wrote it for Bitcoin Magazine. One of the things he said, which was right at the time, but it's becoming increasingly wrong, is a DAO can't keep a secret, right?
Well, a Constitution DAO, right? I mean, it's like everybody knows what's going on, so of course you're going to get outbid if you know how much money there is in the treasury.
Yeah, so you need certain cryptography to hide that, whether it be homomorphic encryption or oblivious memory or whatever the hell it is. That you need some primitive to allow the DAO to keep and operate on some secret piece of information, reveal it in certain contexts to certain custodians, but the general people don't have it, but they know the integrity of the secret is preserved. So this is just an example of a hard problem. And that's just one small thing of hundreds of hard problems that need to be resolved in the DAO space. So we're open for business as an ecosystem, and my company in particular. And governance is one area of research that we're going to keep investing more and more money, go from the millions, eventually long-term to the tens of millions. And there's lots of cool things to do. But where I'm most interested in this research is governance as it relates to organizational design, so the O in DAO. And what I'm trying to figure out is what organizations are low-hanging fruit for DAO governance. Not everything is the same thing. So what we're trying to do is build a DAO for Cardano, and that's a cryptocurrency. So it seems like that's a low-hanging fruit organization to govern that type of thing with some form of a decentralized organization. But what else could you do? Like, could you do a corporation? A company. So, Wyoming is an example where you could start from that. If people want to pick that up and live that experiment and run their company or their process, whatever that may be this way, that's something we'd love to talk about and work with. But it's a big ecosystem. There's 300 plus projects and 3 million people. So if it's not us, it's someone else. You're always going to find a friend.
Right. Well, the world is certainly, it's changing. I mean, when we were talking before, you pointed up at the Blockbuster DAO and you said, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen, right? And of course, that's what anyone would think.
Well, but you got to understand, we did the Dish deal, so I know Charlie Ergen and Chris and the other guys to the extent where when they bought Blockbuster, Chris actually showed his dad the South Park episode where Randy bought the last Blockbuster. They forced their father to watch that. Right. So we know that group of people really well.
And, but what's funny is that yesterday, Tasafilla, I think that's how we pronounce it, is he's Anon, but he was here talking to us about how he came up with the idea, and now he's actually in talks with Dish. I mean, and so no, at least not yet, no IP lawsuit. So I mean, the world is changing. Corporations are evolving.
Well, you got to be careful though. It's a bit distasteful to take IP that is owned by another company and not engage that company in any capacity and just start with the fundraising side to be like, we're going to raise all this money to go do this thing. It would have been different if they'd already gotten a commitment and they're fundraising towards a threshold. Like they said, hey, if we could get to 50 million, would you sell this to us? And they said, sure, okay. So, well, we have this contract, let's go do it. This is the problem with our industry is that people have 2 doses of brain and half a dose of common sense sometimes. Right. So they're real good at the engineering, the technology, and they understand the tools and how you can use these things to create liquidity and refine. It's just the same with the NFT space, where people create NFTs of IP stuff, and they don't actually own the underlying IP, and they go make $1 million, and the person who owns the underlying assets, like, you just made $1 million off my thing. Right. Oh, no, it's not. It's an NFT. I swear, it's different. It's an NFT of your thing. It's like the singer formerly known as Prince. Right. It's like, it's not the same. See, it's different. I'm a symbol. So you have to be real careful with that. And you have to understand that just because we have new technology, that doesn't translate to a new business model to the extent that we throw away the baby with the bathwater. There's still laws, there's still IP, there's still contracts, there's still legal entities, there's still all of this stuff.
But should there be? I mean, you guys give, everything's open source and everything's shared, and in general, the blockchain community is fairly open source. What role does IP actually play?
At the protocol level, in my view, none. I think it should all be open source. But there does exist intellectual property because that is an extension of you as a creative. Imagine you're an artist and you create this amazing painting or this amazing song or this amazing sculpture, and for somebody to go and just take it from you and say, well, that belongs to the world now, bye. That's your choice. I believe in freedom and choice. And so I think you should, at the end of the day, have that ultimate decision. But I can't intellectually say I'm building an open source protocol and everybody's invited to use it. But by the way, I own the patent, and at any given time, I can shut you out. That's not decentralization, right? So you have to be careful with what you say and the expectation management and the promises and commitments you make. The problem is, and this is why courts exist and arbitration exists and marriage counseling exists, is humans are really bad at expectation management.
Yeah.
We think today, right here, right now, that we want X, and then later on we turn out we want Y. And sometimes we rewrite history to say, well, it was always Y. I always wanted Y, these types of things, right? A great example would be a lot of the people who acted in The Room, Tommy Wiseau's movie. Remember The Room?
No. Never seen
Does anybody know The Room?
Who's seen The Room?
You're tearing me apart, Lisa. Okay, it's widely regarded as one of the worst movies ever made.
Oh.
Okay. It was financed
So
by
you
this,
recommend it highly?
No, it's so bad they made a movie about the making of the movie, and James Franco played Tommy Wiseau. Okay, it's called The Disaster Artist or something like that. Great movie. So anyway, a lot of the actors who played in The Room when it first came out, they're like, this is the worst mistake I made in my life. Oh my God, why did I agree to be in this movie? This is terrible. But after the movie was like so bad it became good, and it's become a cultural phenomena, now a lot of people are like, yeah, I was in The Room. Right? So people's preferences and choices change over time with facts and circumstances. And that's great when it's opinions and culture and diversity. That's bad when it's legal agreements. That's bad when there are commitments. There's the flow of funds, these types of things. So the point of the legacy system is there are thousands of years of wisdom about best practices and case law and contract law and agreements and that we as a species have collectively cobbled together. And it makes no sense to say throw all of that away. What you do instead is say, what parts of that are relevant to what we do? And do we need to update and modernize for what we do? And what parts aren't relevant anymore? We don't need a lot of laws about, where you should hitch your horse and, how big the wheels of your carriage need to be and so forth. We kind of move beyond that. But we still do need traffic laws, right? We still do need some notion of who has right of way in a street, these types of things. It's just the stakes are higher now because instead of going 10 miles an hour, you go 70 miles an hour. And it's a lot more dangerous.
Yeah,
you see?
Especially if we go three-dimensional with,
Yeah, and drones are running to this very thing. How do you translate traffic laws and congestion laws for a city where you have drones and autonomous vehicles and these types of things? Do we throw away all that? No, you change your laws or you update and modernize them to account that we're now in a three-dimensional space instead of a two-dimensional space.
Right. Well, we have so many more things to discuss, but we're out of time. I really appreciate you coming by. Hopefully we could do a podcast soon or something.
Yeah.
Awesome. Charles Hoskinson, everyone.
Igor. This was a lot of fun.